All right, come on in, everybody. Welcome back to another Tennessee Holler Hour. I'm Justin. I'm here with Cassie and our friend, the other Justin. TNHoller.com is where you can find us at the TN Holler on Twitter and Facebook. We are also all throughout the state at all these other hollers. Thanks to your support. We really always appreciate the support that you guys give us. Chip in a few bucks a month, get a holler hat, mask, all that good stuff. And then make sure to make a plan to join us on May 15th for Holler Fest, where we're going to have all these awesome people, including Justin, giving speeches and basically talking about issues that our state is facing. And it should be a really great time. We just added Stella Parton is going to join us. She's going to sing a song and talk a little bit, and it's going to be a great time. So May 15th, 2 p.m. Central Time, join us and hear from a lot of great people. So they're going to be talking about issues. One of the issues that is facing our state is this issue of these ugly anti-protester bills that have been snaking their way through the legislature. There was one in particular that we thought we had beaten back, shamed into oblivion, the run-over-a-protester bill from Representative Ron Gant. And at one point, Senator Jack Johnson, who is my senator here in Williamson County, Cassie's too, I believe. Yep. And there was some national press about it. At one point, CNN wrote an article about it and reached out to Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson hid behind Representative Gant, saying it isn't yet moving in the Senate. He seemed to understand that this was an ugly bill, and it seemed to have gone away for the year. But now we've come to find out that it now has a new sponsor. Senator Rose, Paul Rose, is the sponsor in the Senate, and it has apparently been used as a bargaining chip with the House to get this budget passed. The House essentially said, if you want your budget passed, you have to let us run over protesters. And then just now, we also learned, Justin alerted us to this quote from Jason Zachary in Knoxville, essentially saying that it became a priority again after last weekend in Knoxville in the wake of Anthony Thompson Jr. being shot to death in a school by police. They went into a residential area to protest at Sharm Allen, the DA's house. And Jason Zachary essentially says because of that protest, now they want to be able to hit protesters. Justin, you have tracked these bills. You have put in the hours holding these people accountable. You were involved in a 63-day protest at the plaza. First of all, thank you for all you've done. And second of all, what is your feeling about seeing this anti-protester bill revived?
Yeah, Justin and Cassie, thank you so much for having me. Again, I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. We thought that this bill was dead, but there's a saying in Spanish, mala hierba nunca muerte, which means bad weeds never die. And so this bad weed is back, and it's a poisonous weed that will risk, putting all of our lives in even more danger for exercising our First Amendment rights. And so we've been tracking this bill because we know that this has been a very extreme legislative session. And I think that this is a very climactic end to the session where they've taken off the white sheets and the mask and are saying that because you protested, we're afraid that you're going to protest again, like you did last summer. We're going to pass these laws that will make it a felony to protest in the street without a permit, that will give immunity to drivers who hit protesters, and that will create some very abstract new charges like intimidating someone in the commission of a riot. And I just want to just say too that we have to be very vigilant to not allow them to make this an anti-rioting bill. We already have anti-rioting bills on the books. They tried to actually charge me with one this summer, which they ended up pulling away. I guess if you stand silently, they consider that a riot if you're a person of color in the state of Tennessee. But if they really want to deal with riots, I have a name for them. The name is Terry Lynn Weaver, who participated in a riot insurrection, who still serves in the Tennessee General Assembly, who was at the insurrection on January 6th and has had no accountability this whole session. So they want to look at stopping rioting. They don't need a bill. They don't need SB 846. They need a mirror to look internally in the legislature.
That's really well said. It's hard not to notice that they just recently renamed one of the streets right outside the legislature John Lewis Boulevard. John Lewis famously was a part of the March in Selma across a bridge, which this bill would make a felony and enable people essentially to hit those protesters. And then also Thelma Harper, the first Black senator in Tennessee, was a part of a protest. That's a little fuzzy there, but she was in the street. She ended up getting arrested for her protest. So, I mean, the point is they are on the one hand celebrating people who fought for civil rights, marched in the streets, and then on the other hand, criminalizing and putting in very obvious danger people like yourself who continue that tradition to this day.
Definitely. I mean, let's call this bill for what it is. It's Jim Crow 2.0. This bill is seeking to stop specific types of protests. This is a stop racial justice protests, police accountability protests that happen in the summertime. And that's what this bill is about. Make no mistake about it. In fact, as we saw today, Senator Jason Zachary from Knoxville said that this bill is in direct response to the anti-police violence protests that happened in Knoxville, in the city where he lives. That's why they revived this. And that's why they're prioritizing this in the budget, not healthcare, not living wages, not things that would help Tennesseans like education funding, but funding a bill that will increase incarceration of protesters, funding a bill that will grant immunity to drivers who run over protesters. This bill is violent, and yet every single time we go before the legislature, they say, we want to stop violence. We want to make sure you're peaceful. Let's look at who is instigating violence. Let's look at who is trying to do a Charlottesville do-over here in Tennessee. Let's look at who's making it so you have to have a permit to protest, and if you don't, you'll be charged with a felony. But we want permitless guns in our state. Let's look at who was actually violent. And again, it's those who are in the legislature who always try and gaslight and project their own actions onto others.
Yeah, I have a quick question just about kind of the ridiculous logistics of this, just kind of because I mean you have so much experience protesting, leading the Plaza protest this past summer and many others, and it's I just in watching these committee hearings every day, I hear people like State Representative Curcio say things like, oh, well, we're really careful about making sure that these definitions are narrow, like who these, like what a rioter is and this type of, illegal action and that sort of thing. We're tight. They use language like we're tightening, the definitions of these things to make sure that people who aren't supposedly breaking their new laws will not actually be arrested. But we all know that doesn't work in practicality. And I am of the mind that even if people are pushing those boundaries and doing things that would be considered illegal, that a lot of times those things are justified in the face of the basically the police state that we have. So what can you just talk about, just from an activist's perspective, an organizer's perspective on the ground, where even if someone isn't breaking their new ridiculous, horrendous laws, that it's very easy for other people to get potentially swept up and be charged with these new illegal actions, essentially.
Definitely. Let me share a personal experience. In the summertime, I was standing outside the Capitol in the vicinity of the parking garage, and I was arrested and charged with obstructing a highway. What this bill would now make a felony. I go to court on May 17th, one of 10 charges. That is one of them. And if I would have been charged with this new law, I would be charged with a felony, which means I would have a much greater bail I had to pay to get out of jail, and that I would risk losing my voting rights. And that's what they want to do, is they want to chill free speech in Tennessee. They passed a law where if you stay outside the Capitol, like we did for 62 days, that is a felony. And now they're passing a law to say that if you stand in the street or if you protest without a permit, then that is also a felony. These laws are Jim Crow laws. It's to make sure that protesters lose their voting rights. It's to make sure that we have excessive bail. Part of the punishment when they arrest you, they know that sometimes these arrests are not legitimate, they're wrong, but part of the punishment is to drag you through the court process. We were arrested, in the summer, and I have not still been able to go to court yet. And so what does that mean? That when you apply for jobs, it's hard to get a job. You have to go to court, you have to pay each time you go there, take time off work, take time off school, go to court. This is a part of their punishment for us. And so this bill, by making a felony, is a part. They know it's wrong. They know that police will use it in abusive ways, and yet they're trying to just give more charges. Another charge that is so broad is assault of an officer. If you, for example, they charge a few of us with assaulting officers. If you speak in a megaphone, or if you pull your hand back, or if you act in ways that are considered quote unquote provocative contact, that is considered assault on an officer in Tennessee. And that is another charge that I'm charged with. And so these charges are so vague and ambiguous, and they're just giving him much more and more, rope to just do whatever they want, to abuse and run roughshod of the Constitution. And I think it's so ironic that these are the people who say that when it comes to the Second Amendment, we don't want any regulations, we don't want any restrictions. This is a God-given right, they said. But when it comes to the First Amendment, they must have annotated their Constitution and blacked it out, redacted that part of the Constitution, because the First Amendment has no protections in Tennessee. The First Amendment, we saw that these same senators who are now reviving this anti-protest law, all of the Republicans signed a letter condemning Black athletes for kneeling in East Tennessee. First Amendment does not apply to people of color in Tennessee. First Amendment does not apply to people engaged in racial justice protests in Tennessee. And that's the way that they want to have it. And they want to codify this even further into law.
I think that's really obvious and well said. And, they could point to the language in the law and say, oh, well, they have to try not to hit people, or, get into the minutia of that. I don't know what the exact wording is in the law itself, but
with due care, as long as you're exercising due care.
Due care, right? So what does that mean? And the net effect is they're sending a signal that you can hit protesters and the law is on your side. And we have already seen that this is not a hypothetical. This has actually happened. And I'm going to send out a trigger warning here for people who don't like to see this stuff. But I do think it's important to know that this is not hypothetical. This has happened. And this is a BLM protester getting run over by a truck driver in Johnson City. And this was a horrific thing that happened, but it did happen. And it's important to know that this stuff does happen.
Access to.
I'm actually not going to play it. I just decided. Anyway, you can see it. The point is that people do get hit. It happened in Memphis. It happened in Johnson City. It happens all over the place. And so, Justin, I'm going to give you a chance to answer somebody who's in our mentions right now. One person I had to block because it was just too much, but Cindy Pack is essentially saying, stay out of the road and you won't get hit. Stop blocking traffic. What do you say when somebody just gives you that talking point?
Yeah. It's interesting when people make that point, because if people would have done that during the civil rights movement, I would not be standing here before you. If people were not in Selma, I would not be able to vote. If women suffragettes were not in the streets in Tennessee, as they were, women would not be able to vote. If we were not disruptive of injustice and disrupting this artery, that's what a street is the artery of the city, of the community, then people will not know that we are facing a heart attack when it comes to police violence, when it comes to racist violence, when it comes to the abuses that are happening. And so what these people who say stay off the street, what they want is they don't want anyone to protest. What they want is a parade, because that's exactly what a comfortable protest is. It's nothing more than a parade. When you go and you just stand on the sidewalk and walk in a circle and say, whoa, we have our sign, that's a parade. But when you go and say this, we're going to bring tension to this issue, we're going to bring what's under the surface to the surface, as Dr. King said, that is a protest. A protest is not meant to comfort white, power structures. It's not meant to comfort those who want us to be silent. That's what they want. And I would say to our friend, like the dear sister who asked that question, as John F. Kennedy said, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. If you're condemning peaceful protest, if you're going to make it a felony to peacefully protest, then what can we do? If it's going to be the same charge to act violently as it is to stand in the street or to sit outside the Capitol in the hot sun, if it's going to be a felony either way, then what will we do? What we're seeing now is we cannot be merely concerned, as Dr. King said, about what the people protesting and condemning their actions without condemning what brought them to the streets. I don't know if people realize that we don't want to be in the streets. We don't want to be at risk of getting hit. We don't want to have to stay outside the Capitol for 62 days, but we're out there for a reason. And it's to make those who have put a blindfold on and said, close their ears to what's happening and say, see us, hear us, see our humanity, see the crisis in Tennessee when it comes to racial justice and white supremacy, see the crisis in Tennessee when it comes to police violence, see there is a crisis. And if you will not see us, if you will not hear us, when we come with petitions, when we come, won't even let people come in the legislature for the most part for a long time. People were not even allowed in. We have to go to the streets. We have to go to the plaza, and we have to occupy public space and say that this is the space that belongs to the people, that these streets belong to the people, and that the people have a right to, as John Lewis say, find a way to get in the way and get in good trouble, necessary trouble.
Justin, I just want to say to Cindy Pack, this was a personal message to you, but also to everybody who thinks that that is a valid thing to say to the protesters. Like, this was an opportunity to let that in. I hope you heard what he just said. I wanted to give him a chance to address it. I think it was really beautifully put. And, it's absolutely the truth that if protesters are backed into a corner, then they're going to end up doing the very things that people are concerned with. It's if you felonize protest and you make it just as punishable as actual violence, what do people expect to happen? So, I do think that's a really valid and great point. And protest is meant to be uncomfortable. And so go ahead.
Right.
I was just saying, we heard the same argument. My grandparents heard the same argument, and my elders heard the same argument when they said, well, just don't go sit at the lunch counters. Just accept segregation. Mm-hmm. Don't make a big fuss out of it. Rosa, go to the back. Come on, that's how it's always been. Just go to the back. Don't disrupt traffic. Don't disrupt the flow of the bus system, of the bus schedule. Just go to the back and be passive. Like, that is what we've heard for so long. It's just, don't put your head up too high. Don't, my grandmother told me that when she was growing up, she had to walk on the street. If there's a white person coming on the sidewalk, she had to go to the street to make way. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I'm in the street today, because if that's where our ancestors had to go, we'll go to the street, we'll go to the sidewalk, we'll go wherever we have to. But what we won't go is backwards. There's a lot of people in Tennessee who are saying we want to take this nation back. And we better believe them. They're taking us back to a time that we don't want to go to. And we must go. We must refuse to go without raising a dissent. We must refuse to go without raising a voice of protest and opposition. There's been a lot of quietness. I'm grateful for the Tennessee Holler for being one of the consistent, steadfast presences down at the Capitol, but it's been so silent as all these policies of hurt and violence have been passed. All this violence that we're seeing, this policy violence, has been so quiet. And if they make it a felony to protest, it's going to be even more quiet. And that's what they want. This whole legislative session, they have, this new building, they have new stairways where they don't even have to interact with the public. They have private elevators. Now, the whole structure of the legislature has changed where they limit interaction with the public. That does not sound like the people's house to me. That does not sound like democracy to me. And the truth is, they don't want it to be anymore. The legislature has become a fraternity for racist old white men who just want to be in a bubble and not hear what we have to say. But really that's not true. What the Constitution says. And so we're not going to allow them to do that without a voice of opposition.
It's really true. And just the last thing I just want to say to Cindy Pack, and I'm going to let it go, is she's saying 90% of the protests have escalated to violence. That's completely untrue. There's a study that said the exact opposite, that over 90% have been peaceful. Even Governor Lee, when asked about it at a press conference, acknowledged that they were mostly peaceful. So if you're going to come here and holler these fake news statistics, we're going to holler the truth back at you, Cindy. And I'm happy to send you some links if you want to message us, but that's going to be that from you. Justin, we mentioned the fraternity and the legislators. Specifically, Jack Johnson is somebody that I wanted to mention because his name was on this as a sponsor and he took it off. And now Paul Rose is the sponsor. What does it say to you that Jack Johnson took his name off of this, even though it was on before, but will probably vote for it anyway?
Courage is lacking in our legislature. I think that's very apparent. And I think Senator Johnson saw that this was wrong. When he was asked about it by CNN, he didn't want his name attached to it. He said, oh, go ask Ron Gant, the House sponsor. Now it came before the Senate. He said, oh, take my name off, And so it's sad that he knows it's wrong, but there's such a toxicity in the legislature that he's going to feel like he's obligated to vote for it because they have this culture where people have to fall in line. They can't vote their conscience. They can't vote what's the best interest of their people. They have to vote whatever they feel like will, make them comfortable with their colleagues and make them comfortable with these extreme groups like ALEC, like Americans for Prosperity, who they feel like the NRA, who they feel like they bow to, who they serve, not the people of Tennessee. And so Senator Johnson knows this is wrong. He took his name off of it. I think that's a victory in itself, that every Tennessean, we were targeting calls at him, we were tweeting at him. And I think everyone who did that, we should commend ourselves that was a victory, a small victory, but it's not enough. And so the person who we want to put this bill on now, the person who refused to have a backbone is not only Senator Johnson, but also Lieutenant Governor, the Senate Speaker, Randy McNally. It was a decision by leadership in their negotiations with the House leadership to bring this bill back up, to suspend the rules, to call the Judiciary Committee back specifically for this bill, specifically for this hateful, racist, violent bill. This is the priority they want to end on. And so we're calling this McNally's run-over-protestors bill. And we encourage folks to call Randy McNally and ask him, Speaker McNally, is this the legacy you want to live? He lived at the time of Jim Crow. He lived at the time of segregation. He's one of the oldest members in our legislature. He's been there since the 70s. And so this is a chance to be on the right side of history. He stood in firm support of a Nathan Bedford Forrest statue of a KKK Grand Wizard in our Capitol. He's been one of the staunchest defenders of that bust. But now is the chance to rectify that legacy, Brother McNally. Your time in the legislature is coming to a close. Soon you will have to retire. And I want to see, will your grandchildren be ashamed of you for pushing this type of bill? Like many of us today are ashamed of people like Nathan Bedford Forrest. Like many of us are ashamed of people like Bull Connor and George Wallace. Will you be the new George Wallace of the 21st century and push these Jim Crow bills that criminalize protest of Black and brown people specifically? Will this be your legacy?
Well, I think that's a powerful message. And, we have seen him respond to criticism and shaming a little bit more than some of the more shameless members of the legislature. So perhaps the call to McNally to hear this will not fall on deaf ears, even though I know that he has no patience for the KKK Grand Wizard bus conversation. That's still sitting in the building commission. That's where that's supposed to be. And he has not brought it up. Nobody's brought it up. So it's been a little bit of a mixed message from him. He actually at one point posted a meme that was pretty threatening to protesters right around the time of Kenosha. So I'm not quite sure what will happen there. I think the odds are always long if you are trying to bet on reason with these guys. But McNally, the senators, the Judiciary Committee, which Cassie's working on a graphic for that we're going to put up for everybody to respond to and reach out. There's a week left. Cassie, do you have any other questions for Justin before we let him go here?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of like to hit that point again that you were talking about, Justin, about how we wouldn't have made the gains of the past if not for people who have protested and agitated. And sometimes, it falls more into the category of nonviolent protests than it does necessarily peaceful, because, being nonviolent means that you're still agitating, that you're still, getting under the skin of the status quo, essentially. So I guess how does this, I guess, what is the, how would you describe in your own words, like the hypocrisy of how this goes against the First Amendment and freedom of speech and the right to assembly, which a lot of people, don't always think of first when they think of the First Amendment. And just like how, at least, at least in my opinion, and I think probably in yours as well, I would assume, just that mass movements of people who are agitating, are the ones that really get things done in the end. It's not the people at the top deciding of their own fruition and goodwill most of the time, to do something right. It's the people at the bottom who are agitating. So, and that's why we're seeing this tightening, this constraint. So I guess, what are your thoughts on that? And just the, I guess the hypocrisy of how it goes against the First Amendment and the right to assemble.
Definitely. Make no mistake, this bill is retaliation for the Derek Chauvin verdict that happened. This bill is retaliation. It's ironic to me that this same Judiciary Committee, some of its members, almost unanimously in the Senate, passed a bill that would have some police reforms, that would ban no-knock warrants, and that would limit chokeholds. And they felt really good about this. They felt like they were doing something, and it was a good bill. It was a good start, I should say. And now what they're doing is they're criminalizing the very protests that forced them to even see this as an issue. They're criminalizing the very protests that forced America and the world to see the issue of what happened with George Floyd when he was suffocated and lynched on a Minneapolis sidewalk. They're criminalizing those very protests. And yet they feel good about a small, minute step of police reform.
It's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. I mean, let's really hit that point. You know, this police reform bill carried by Senator Mike Bell, who's the chairman of the judiciary, and Curcio on the other side, you know, it has bipartisan support. There are legislators on both sides. Rep. Hardaway called it a Christmas wish list. And now they are turning around and criminalizing the very people that made that an issue, that lifted it up, that put it on the map, that, you know, put the pressure on, that enabled it to actually pass with flying colors the way it has. So, you know, you can't do the thing that protesters are asking you to do and then turn around and criminalize them for asking you to do it. I mean, this is one of the more hypocritical things that we're going to see out of this legislature in a long time right here.
Yeah. I mean, the same goes for the Nathan Bedford Forrest bus. You know, we've been protesting that bus for years. Governor Bill Lee was initially opposed to removal, but we consistently protested. We consistently showed up. We sat in. We spent the time out in the plaza. And then he said, okay, let's call a meeting of the Capitol Commission and let's remove the statue. If it wasn't for protests, none of these things would be made. If it wasn't for protests, we would not have any progress in this nation. And so I think it's really important that we lift up the importance of protest and democracy, that this bill is very important to me, because it is a bill that can protect all of our other rights. If we don't have the right to protest and oppose harmful legislation, then they can do whatever they want, you know, on a daily basis, if there's not people there to raise a moral dissent. And so we have to raise a moral dissent. We have to realize that this bill is economically indefensible. They're allocating money in the budget for this bill. It is constitutionally inconsistent. And it's just insane. This is what this bill is. And so we have to call it out for what it is. We have to bring attention to this bill. We are encouraging people to show up on Tuesday at the Judiciary Committee. We're trying to allow people to be able to testify. We don't know how that will go, but no matter what, we will be there. And we will testify in the hallways if we have to. But we need people to show up, to draw attention to this bill, to not allow this to be the climax of the legislature, you know, this legislative session to happen in silence. You know, to be honest, you know, you see these bags in my eyes. Since this was announced, I've had so much anxiety, because I know that if this bill passes, it will be a death sentence for someone in our state. It will only be a matter of time, because some people saying, well, what instance will this happen? When would if a driver claims to be exercising care and kill someone, when would that happen? And I point to stand your ground laws. There are a lot of people who stand your ground laws say, I was in fear of my life, like George Zimmerman. And what did he do? He killed Trayvon Martin. So what will happen with this bill is that people will claim that they're in fear of their life. Oh, there's a protester with a paper sign, and I have my 2-ton, you know, Dodge truck, and I was in fear of my life, and so I'm going to run him over.
Yep,
it makes
no sense. Happen. There's no question. It's going to happen. It will happen. It has happened. There are people who are looking for this green light.
Yeah, and as you know, as we were talking about earlier, just like with these definitions that they throw out, that is literally anybody could claim that under pretty much any circumstance. It is the most vague thing, and the power dynamic is totally in favor of the person with the vehicle in every possible way in these scenarios, and then now even more so with the you know, with this bill if it passes. So it's just it's unbelievable, and you know that they see it. You know that they see that that's like something that every driver will be able to claim, even if it's not true.
Yeah, that's why these bills exist. You know,
exactly.
For a while, Matthew Hill ran this bill, and it died. You know, this is something that's been coming, and the net impact is going to be somebody is going to get hurt, and that's really why Jack Johnson took his name off of it, because he knows that. He sees that coming, and he doesn't want to be the one whose name is on it, but his name is going to be on it no matter what, because he's going to vote for it. And so
the guy who killed,
hiding from that.
Yeah, the guy who killed Heather Heyer could claim that, you know, and could potentially be fine, and not, you know, have any repercussions for it because of what he did. I mean, it's that sort of thing.
Right. So I fully understand. And Justin, I mean, you know, it makes me nervous for you, frankly, this bill and you know, the protesters that you spent so much time with. I see Angels on here talking to us. So, you know, it's definitely something that should keep a lot of people up nights. And the idea that, you know, this was gone, but no, this was the priority. This was the thing that they needed in order to pass their $42 billion budget, was they needed to make it so that people can run over protesters with impunity. It's just a gross testament to their priorities. It says so much about, you know, where their hearts are. And I really think that one of the most impactful things that these protests, that your protests and the protests that we're seeing throughout the country do, is it's the reaction to the protests that is actually the success of the protest. It really shows people the hearts of the people that are being protested against. So, you know, in some ways, this backlash just shows you how effective you guys have been in your protests in the state. I'm not saying that it's a good thing in any way, but I do think it sort of justifies, in a way, the protests themselves.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I'll just say to anyone who's listening now, because there's people say, does protest make a difference? If your protest did not make a difference, they would not be trying so hard to stop you from protesting.
Same with
The
voting.
same goes for voting. If your voting didn't make a difference, they wouldn't be passing all these voter suppression bills.
Right.
There's power in these things, and they know that. And when we actually flex that power, then we have the backlash. Then we have these bills that try and restrict it and take us backwards. And so make no mistake, I think that the legislators know. McNally, Speaker Sexton, Ron Gant, you know that if this bill passes, we will still protest. And if something does happen to me, I would ask whoever knows me and loves me to bring my casket not to a funeral home, but bring it outside the Capitol, and let them know that these are the people who are killing us. Let them know that these are the people who took our lives away from us, who took our safety away from us. Let them know who did this. Because I think that we have to connect the dots here. We have to tell the truth. We have to let them know that this is not, that bills have consequences. Bills have consequences. And I'm afraid, I know that someone is going to be hurt by this. And so, you know, I will be there. We're going to fight with everything we have against this bill. Next week, we'll be there every single day if we have to. And then if it passes, we will continue to show up in the street, because what they want is for us to be afraid to come out, is for us to be afraid to continue to protest. And that will never happen. And so they're saying, okay, we disagree with you. You can disagree with us. But there's a difference between disagreeing with us and sanctioning for us to be killed, sanctioning for us to be assassinated in the streets by vehicles who have already threatened to run over us. I've been at numerous protests where cars rev their engines and say, "Move out the way, I'm going to hit you." It's happened. And now
every single one.
I've been there too. Yep.
And I know from experience too, people say, well, you know, and this is the thing that's part of the trauma from the summer, is we know also the police will not protect us. We know that for those, you know, who are up in court against officers who have lied on the testimony, they will not protect us. The state of Tennessee's government will not protect us. And so I look, you know, to all those here and say that we are all that we have to protect each other, that we must come out to the streets and be buffers for each other, that we must, you know, try and stop this bill. But if it does happen, we need to collectively come out and be safety for each other and have mutual aid for each other, because that's the only thing that will save us in the insanity that's happening in Tennessee right now. Not these lawmakers. I think, you know, what's going to happen, and I'll end with this, is that they have the power to do whatever they want. We see that this bill, they're going to pass it in one day. It's on the agenda for Tuesday. They're going to pass this bill in one day. They passed that anti-protest bill in the summer in 3 days. They can do whatever they want with their power. And so I think our job is really to go and to kind of be a check on that power, and to be a check on whatever happens, and say that even though you have dominant authority, you don't have ultimate authority, that there's still people who will resist you. And even though you have a super majority, that does not mean that we're going to automatically bow down and just go along to get along. Like I said, it's been so important what the Holler's been doing this session, because it's been one of the voices who's went up there and made them uncomfortable. And that's what we have to do with what's happening, is that they want us to go backwards and to be silent, and that we have to refuse to do that. I keep repeating this point because I just really hope that we get the seriousness of what's happening here, is that they're taking away all of our nonviolent means of change. They're passing these voter suppression laws across the nation. They're passing these anti-protest laws across the nation. So they're taking away our nonviolent means of change, and they're making it easier for people to kill us. In Tennessee, people can walk around without a permit with a gun now. So if someone gets upset, they can have a gun. They can either hit you with their car, or they can shoot you, whatever they want, or they can get the police to do it. You know, and these things are real fears that people have. These things are real incidences. We saw Kenosha with Kyle Rittenhouse. We see, these vehicles running over people. There is real violence for protesting. And in fact, we live in a state that worships white supremacist violence when we look at the monuments we have around us. And so you cannot separate the root from the fruit. The roots of what is being planted, the seeds from the fruit of what is being, born here in Tennessee. And that is this white supremacist violence that is going to end up with some of us dead. And so I'm just going to stop there because this makes me emotional. It makes me fear for my friends. It makes me fear for my safety. But in that fear, we're going to walk forward still, because no matter what, we ain't going to let Cameron Sexton, we're not going to let Randy McNally turn us around.
Well, I look forward to hearing you sing that song again because I miss that. And I hope that nothing happens. I fear that something will. And, I really hope that people show up a Tuesday at 8:30 because they do not deserve to pass this peacefully. This is violence and they need to be made uncomfortable about what they're doing here. So we will be there 8:30 on Tuesday at Cordell Hull. It'll be a committee meeting. They're literally reviving the Senate Judiciary Committee to discuss this bill, which was closed for the session. That's what's going on here. So I hope anybody watching will come and spread the word. We'll post graphics about who to reach out to. Justin, thank you for what you do. And everybody who's watching, we appreciate you. And Cindy Peck, we pray that one day you are able to think about somebody other than yourself. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you.